Tonight, our rare interview with one of the highest-ranking women in the Trump administration. The ambassador to the United Nations and the former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, is out front. I sat down with Ambassador Haley moments ago. We talked about Trump and Russia. We talked about North Korea and the travel ban, which she initially opposed. But we begin with the breaking news this hour. The top members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Democrat and Republican, saying there's no evidence that Trump was wiretapped by the Obama administration. I asked the ambassador whether it was a mistake for the president to make this claim when there, as so far, is no evidence of it being true.
Well, Aaron, I haven't heard any of that news until just a few minutes ago, so I'm not real sure about the facts in terms of what that is. But what we always said was, an investigation needed to be done, and once the facts came out, the answer would be there. And so certainly that's what I'm going to go back and look, and I think we need to look at the facts, we need to look at the testimony and see what happens.
So if it turns out that what they say, the Democrat and Republican leaders say, is true, there was no wiretapping, there was no surveillance, then what the president tweeted was not true. And it sort of started this wild goose chase and it was baseless. Will that hurt you? Because, if his credibility is hurt, is yours?
No, that's not going to hurt me. What you're seeing is the United States is in an interesting position. On one side, we're coming out very strong. Everyone at the United Nations knows, that there's a new administration in town and they're responding positively. One, that we have the backs of our allies. We're making sure that we have it in a strong way. But two, we're calling out things that are wrong. If the president goes and thinks something has happened and he goes out there and puts it out there, the goal is to make sure the investigation happens, make sure we find out the facts. If it happened, deal with it. If it didn't happen, deal with it. And so I think that's what he's doing.
But I do get to this point. If it didn't happen, then you can pick the word you want to use. It was untrue, it was false, he lied, whatever it might be. But that makes people wonder the next time he says something happened, maybe it didn't happen. And that is a hit to credibility, isn't it?
Well, I understand that, but he'll answer for that. He knows what made him put the tweet out there, and so I think he'll answer to that.
Your view on Russia and that of President Trump has differed at times. He's been defensive of Vladimir Putin. At one time in an interview, when he was asked about Putin being a killer. And what he said, Ambassador, was there are a lot of killers. You think our country's so innocent. That's a quote from him. Putin's Russia, of course, as we know, kills dissidents, kills journalists. He's called Putin smart. You have said unequivocally, you've been definitive about this, the United States cannot trust Russia. Is the president being naive?
I would never say that the president is naive or even imply what he knows or what he thinks on those things. I do know that he's very aware of the things I've said. He has not in any way told me not to say them, and he's not in any way said you need to work with Russia. And so the way we look at Russia is the way we look at every other country. If we see something that's wrong, like their involvement with Crimea and Ukraine, or we see something like them supporting and not fighting the chemical weapons situation in Syria, we're going to call them out on it. But if we see where we can work with them on issues like ISIS, we absolutely are going to do that. So it's not about are they a friend or a foe, it's how can we find them to be a friend when we need them, and when they're a foe, we're going to stay true to American values and call them out on it.
Are you concerned, Ambassador, that Trump himself or the Trump campaign could be compromised in any way by relations with Russians known to U.S. intelligence as these investigations are looking at?
I have no reason to be. I know that everybody else wants to talk about it, but there's nothing that's been concerning to me at all. I know that ambassadors do what ambassadors do, which is go and talk to everyone and try and communicate their stances as much as possible. That's part of doing your job. I haven't seen anything or heard anything that would imply otherwise.
I want to ask you about the other news, the breaking news here, the travel ban. It was supposed to be in effect today, as you know. It was blocked, and you came out and said it's not a Muslim ban, specifically referring to this second new travel ban. Two judges, though, say that it is, and one of them cited some specific comments as part of the reason.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
I think Islam hates us.
To tell you the whole history of it. So when he first announced it, he said Muslim ban. He called me up, he said, put a commission together, show me the right way to do it legally.
So when then candidate Trump proposed a Muslim ban, you were vocal. You called it un-American, you called it unconstitutional. Why do you believe the intent has changed from what these statements say when judges say these are admissible?
Well, first of all, the daughter of Indian immigrant parents, I would never support a Muslim travel ban. I would never support a ban that, labels people based on their religion. What I will support and what I do support is what the president's intention is, which is, and I saw this as governor, can we vet these people properly before we allow them to come into the United States? And as governor, I saw that in many cases we couldn't. And if you see my record, we stopped them from coming in or attempted to stop them from coming in. The president has a genuine concern about the safety of American citizens. That's what you want your president to have a concern of. All he said was he wanted to do a temporary stop, and he wanted his administration to prove to him that they were doing all they could to vet. There's not one U.S. citizen that should question that, because we know the terror in the world. We know the threats in the world. We want to make sure we're doing everything we can to protect people in this country.
So you believe that he has changed his view?
In my conversations with him, as well as with other officials, in no way have they ever implied this was a travel ban. In every way, they have said we have to protect the American people. How do we know for sure that we're not allowing any terrorists or threats in?
And do you have concern if it was really about that, it would have targeted countries, well, let's just say where the 9/11 bombers came from, whether that be Egypt or Saudi Arabia or Lebanon or the United Arab Emirates, none of which, of course, are on this list. Does that worry you?
I think what you want to talk about is this narrative of a Muslim ban. If he really wanted to do a Muslim ban, there'd be a dozen other countries on the list. And you've got, Indonesia's mostly Muslim. None of them are on the list. So if that was his intent, the list would have been a lot longer. What he did was he went by factual basis. Where is the threat? Where are the terrorist threats that we have? And where do we have the least information on the people from that country? That's how it was chosen. It's all about the terrorist threat, and it's not like we're not seeing those threats all across the world. He's just trying to get in front of it to stop any chance that something could happen.
I want to move to Asia. The Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, is there right now, particularly talking about North Korea. And he called for a new approach to North Korea. His words specifically, Ambassador, were the diplomatic and other efforts of the past 20 years to bring North Korea to a point of denuclearization have failed. There have been 6 rounds of sanctions since just 2006 against North Korea. There have been 5 nuclear tests over that time frame. Has diplomacy failed?
I think what you can look at is North Korea has not budged on anything, so we have to take a new approach. What I will tell you is we are taking North Korea very seriously. It is a top priority that when you look at the fact that North Korea over the last year did 24 ballistic missile tests, 2 nuclear tests, you have to question, and then on top of that does multiple ballistic tests at the same time, and you've got the assassination of his brother. You have to call into question what will work and what can't. And so I think what you're seeing Secretary Tillerson do is go and talk to South Korea and let them know that we have their back. Go and talk to Japan and let them know that we need to work together and continue to be the allies that we've been. And then go to China and say, okay, what more do they need to do for you to consider them a threat? And at this point, this is #1 priority for the United States, and we're going to do something about it.
So you're saying #1 priority, which fits with what the then CIA chief, John Brennan, told me last fall. He said this was going to be the #1 issue facing the incoming president, and indeed we now know that it is. But what is this new approach? Knowing that China is the key to this is not new. What is new? I mean, is a preemptive strike now openly on the table?
I know everybody wants just one action that happens. This is about showing that we're serious in the United States about North Korea. This is about showing we're not about talking anymore, and we need other countries, specifically China and Russia, to step up and show us that they are as concerned as North Korea, as we are. And so we're going to call on them to act. That's what this is all about, is calling them to act and see exactly, do they think it's a threat or not? And then we will plan our decision based on what they do.
So if they don't, if it isn't satisfactory, then a preemptive strike then is on the table.
I would never do a hypothetical, but I will tell you all options are on the table.
So when you say all options are on the table, let me ask you, have you spoken to, do you have a relationship at all with the North Korean envoy here at the UN?
I do not.
Not at all? No meetings or anything? Would you meet with him?
Not until they do something positive. We're not seeing any positive actions come out of North Korea. And so I can meet with them, but all they're going to do is continue to show through their actions that they're not listening to anyone. So at this point, it's the reason why we don't want to get back into the 6-party talks. We're not willing to do that. Been there, done that, and it hasn't worked. What we're saying now is you've got a decision to make. We're going to talk to China and find out what their decision is. We're going to talk to Russia and find out what their decision is. At the end of the day, North Korea has to show some sort of positive action, that they take this, our thoughts seriously in order for us to move forward.
You know, during the campaign, you had a contentious relationship with President Trump. I mean, most of it was verbal. I don't know at what point you actually met for the first time. Here you both are.
Every time someone criticizes him, he goes and makes a political attack back. That's not who we are as Republicans.
She's very, very weak on illegal immigration. You can't have that.
Donald Trump is everything we hear and teach our kids not to do in kindergarten.
Nikki Haley, who backed the wrong horse.
Mr. Trump has definitely contributed to what I think is just irresponsible talk.
I've given her tremendous contributions over the years, but I guess now that I'm running, she doesn't like me quite as much.
Ambassador Haley, how often do you talk to President Trump now?
Pretty often. I am in D.C. quite a bit, you know, whether it's NSC meetings. We had lunch week before last, me, him, and the vice president. We're constantly in communication. And you know what I'll tell you is I've always been true to myself. And when I see something wrong, I call it out, regardless of who it is. He knows that about me. We were friends before the election. He was a supporter before the election.
Right, as he pointed out, he had donated you money then.
Yes, and so, but he also knew that I stood strong for what I believed in. And so, as that political play happened, we said what we thought. At the end of the day, I can tell you the number one thing we both want to see is a successful United States, a strong United States, and one that leads again. And so we have a great working relationship. What I am thrilled about is he allows me to do my job. He doesn't tell me what to say. I don't have to take directives. I am part of a group that makes decisions on how we're going to go about doing things forward. He's been unbelievably supportive of the job that I've done.
Have you changed your view then? When you said Donald Trump is everything we teach our kids in kindergarten not to do as an example, do you not feel that way anymore?
When I said that, I was referring to his tone. And I do think that tone matters. And I do think you have to be careful in the way you do that. Having said that, his tone is his tone. His mannerisms are his mannerisms, but his actions are solid. And that's what I appreciate about him, is he's always been about action. And that, honestly, is what I want to see happen.
Do you want him to get off Twitter?
I think he's fine if he's on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. You know, for us, and I've always done my own social media, it's important to have that communication with the public. He feels like he needs to have that communication with the public. And so, you know, you're not going to stop him from tweeting any more than you're going to stop me from tweeting. It's just, you know, it's another way to get the news out. And if he feels like he's not getting the proper things out in the news, he's going to go out and tweet it. So until the relationship's mended between the media and the president, you're going to continue to see him tweet his own news.
Do you think he understands the significance, though, of his tweets?
I
when
think
we talk about the wiretapping, right? If he tweets that out and that is false, if that was a lie, does he understand the harm that that can do to himself, to his own administration?
Well, he would never knowingly lie. I mean, I can honestly say that's not his intention. What I do think he's trying to do is notify the public of what's going on. He's trying to give them the real story of what he knows. And so I think it's unbelievable that you've got a president that's directly communicating with the people, but I can tell you I understand that, because he's worried the people won't find out what he's thinking, what he believes, and so he's telling them directly.
The Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was here, and you were with him and Ivanka Trump. We went to a Broadway show. I guess it was Come From Away.
It was a fantastic show.
I don't know enough about Broadway, but I know you were there last night. Do you and Ivanka Trump have a close working relationship?
We do, yes. I consider we, you know, respected each other before. We work well now. Same with Jared Kushner. I respect both of them tremendously.